Chapter 28. A Wrench in the Plan. The victory was bittersweet. She should have known the barrage of insults was coming from Kent. She deserved it. But manipulating Jordan to win over both him and Margot had cost her everything. She would not blame them for never speaking to her again. It had been the lowest of possible blows, playing on Jordan's confidence and knowing how Margot would respond when he finally broke, and for that she was more repentant than she had ever been in her life. Still, it worked. And now she was that much closer to having a friend back. Their resentment was pacified by the sudden flu outbreak which battered the student population. Kent fell hard and fast, and somehow Jordan managed to hold on a few days longer, even with his proximity to Margot, who was still showing symptoms a week later. By Wednesday, Emma was the only member of the squad attending classes, and in history over half the class was missing due to illness. She'd reached out to Damien Salgo, one of the creeps from the embassy working in the Ministry of Health, who told her a junior squad had contracted it on their way back from Sweden. More importantly, he told her the symptoms were unlikely to last more than 10 days, which was the news she was desperate to hear. The sooner it was over, the less likely it was that anything could interrupt their mission plan. Kent was back at school by Friday, claiming in a brief exchange that, while he could technically take the weekend, he was beyond bored alone in his room, constantly ordering from the delivery menu. Jordan returned Monday, and Margot, despite still looking lightheaded and even whiter than normal, managed to make it in Tuesday afternoon, though a bout of vomiting took her out again Thursday. While Margot's sickness far outlasted the boys, Emma was surprised to find herself spared entirely, although realizing she could fall victim as the time to their mission continued to dwindle only added to her anxiety. Per Kent's request, she was the foreperson for the mission plan, and with Margot out of commission for most of training, Emma had become the squad's de facto captain. Where the flu outbreak was a definite hindrance, it was offset by the placement of Easter, which had proved to be a blessing even more than usual. That Friday being Good Friday, they had the school day off, giving the group a full day in the training center with a few other practicing squads. Monday would be the same. The prep for Guyana was exceptionally faster than China. Without the need for language training, the mission plan was made even easier by the lack of armed security they expected to find there. While National Intel considered the facility abandoned, the program was erring on the side of caution, believing an underground group may still be using its materials. And though this could still mean the place was being watched by men with guns, the arrival of 3 children would almost certainly take them by surprise. Last time they had straddled a world war. This time, they were on a scavenger hunt. The mission plan was straightforward enough, flying into Georgetown from Solhueva, then taking a station mission van 3 hours south into the jungle to the facility. Preparing for the worst, Emma, who had proven to be the most accurate shot in the remaining squad, would take out any external sentries. Then with Margot and Jordan would force their way into the building through the back service entrance and take down any remaining guards attempting to apprehend them. Assuming any active machinery would limit Jordan's vision, their first stop would then be the security office, where one of the 3 would hijack the CCTV footage and relay it back to the van, allowing eyes on the backs as they separated to find the source of Johnny's signal. In the event that the facility truly was abandoned, none of this would be necessary, and would save nearly 10 minutes in clearing their way through the building. Whatever they found inside, unmarked samples would need to be taken back to Solhueva, and if possible, a research foreman would be taken temporary prisoner and interviewed by Emma about the nature of the secret production. From there, they would scour the facility for traces of anything relating to Johnny. Whether or not anything was found, they would then contact local police and evacuate back to Georgetown. If there was a link to Johnny, the embassy would be on call to permit them to follow his trail. The ease at which they memorized the plan unsettled Emma, who kept analyzing the variables to such a degree that she was certain something was missing. Even with armed opposition, the mission was too easy. The most challenging part was what would come after, and that relied on a load-bearing if regarding Johnny's evidence. It was nearly impossible for her to imagine returning to Tylersville without him. To ease her worry about unforeseen circumstances, Andrew had been watching them most days. Without a squad or anything to do, in addition to being 18 and a ranked general, he had taken to working in the control room after the school day. His statement about being addicted clearly showing through. Beyond Xander's usual breakdown at the end of each day, Emma would return home to a long text from her brother about every little thing she did right or wrong, down to something as simple as which way she had turned her head when confronting a noise from elsewhere in the facility. She found most of these texts annoying and redundant, but in some bizarre fashion was touched that he was noticing her passion and making an effort to improve it. The only real hiccup in their extended training came from Margot, who, despite giving her all to the mission in support of Jordan, was still clearly suffering from the after effects of the flu, so much so that Xander cut their training short before the end of the day Friday, after she was unable to continue. Having made it through several hours already, Margot was so fatigued by the afternoon that she failed to raise her gun in time to stop an approaching guard, and was shot multiple times in the back. She refused medical attention, insisting she was simply exhausted from training. Xander ordered her to get some sleep and encouraged the other 3 to take the extended weekend and rest. Emma spent most of the weekend at church. Easter being her favorite holiday, she spent Friday night and Sunday morning with her family in the box at Destiny Baptist, wishing both Johnny and Riley were there with them to make things feel complete. She doubted anything of this magnitude existed in Saudi Arabia, but hoped her brother was finding a way to celebrate with Siobhan all the same. As for Johnny, she simply prayed he was safe. Not she nor the rest of her family expected Margot to come, even with her extended illness, but both Emma and Andrew were surprised to notice Jordan at the Easter service, who had come on his own and was noticeable in the front few rows next to Pastor Luke, over whom he towered with one arm raised. He hadn't talked to Emma much since signing on to the mission, and doubted he would have joined them if she had extended an invite. She spent all of Sunday at her parents', including sleeping there ahead of Monday's extended training session. Andrew drove her there the next morning, himself intending to continue his role upstairs. When they separated, she made her way to an empty dressing room, shortly followed by a heavily caffeinated Xander, then a few minutes later by Jordan and Kent. Xander looked at his watch, then up at the boys, who both looked exhausted. "Where's Margot?" he wondered aloud. "She's going to be late." Jordan shot a quick glance at Kent, then back at Xander. "She threw up this morning," he said cautiously, afraid of being reprimanded for telling the truth. She's not going to make it." "Again?" Xander lifted his cap to scratch at his forehead. "She knows we're 10 days out, right? We leave next week. I already told her to go in today," Jordan defended. "It's still 10 days. Whatever they give her, I'm sure it'll flush out by next week." Xander panned around the three of them. "None of you were sick like that, were you?" "No," Jordan added quickly. "But one of the Henderson girls from our history class was. She probably picked it up from them." Xander sighed, looking at the 3 empty lockers. "We can't take the day off," he lingered on Johnny's. "I know we've been acing the runs, but we have to keep pushing until we go." Jordan looked at Kent, who seemed to understand the question both he and Xander were keeping to themselves. "I'm staying in the van," Kent dissented. "That was a part of the deal. I'm not touching it." "Grab Andrew," Emma realized aloud, noting Xander's equal unwillingness to step into Margot's spot. Not sure what compelled her, she followed her train of consciousness. "He's been watching us for weeks. He knows exactly what we're doing." The 3 guys looked at her apprehensively. "That way none of us have to switch roles," she added. "Otherwise he's just upstairs doing nothing." Jordan turned to Xander and shrugged. "Might as well," he said. Xander turned to Emma. "Do you have any idea the kind of paperwork I would need? He's Andrew Guerin," she interrupted, pulling out the status card she always hated to use. 2-star? I can't imagine they would have an issue with it on a day off." It took an hour for the request to find its way through the right channels, but by lunchtime Andrew had taken Margot's place without fail. Only limited by his inability to use his effect or match what she could do with hers, Emma had never seen someone so effortlessly maneuver their way across the training floor. For years she had heard how impressive her brother was when it came to combat, but now she was finally seeing it in action. Andrew was 3 steps ahead of everything they did, never even needing Xander or Kent to relay warning of an approaching target, or hesitating at the complete randomization of the building's floor plan from their previous entry. Everything he did was with a vengeful hunger, as if he still needed to prove himself after 4 years in the program. She struggled to imagine his capabilities with a source of water added to the mix. By the time Monday's training was finished, Andrew was desperate for more. The squad had not only finished more sweeps of the building than they had in every previous session combined, they'd broken their quickest time in 7 separate scenarios. All 3 of the others were visibly impressed, almost motivated by Andrew's energy. So much so that when Margot returned to the squad the following afternoon, feeling fully herself for the first time in weeks, it felt like a downgrade. Still, Margot's Friday mishap never repeated, and by the following Monday all 5 of them were giddy with anticipation ahead of their flight to Argentina. That night Emma could hardly sleep. It had been a problem since he disappeared, but the closer they were to finding Johnny, the more she felt his absence. Spending every night with him for an entire semester had been a blessing, now transformed into a curse. She had grown so reliant on him beside her, falling asleep alone had become a chore. Every time she managed to smuggle something under the counter, the contents would mysteriously disappear. No doubt Margot's doing as part of her silent revenge. Melatonin pills were nowhere near as powerful as what she'd taken in China, and her body had normalized the maximum safe dosage months ago. She'd almost considered talking to Kent about it, but realized with everything else going on he might read into her request more than she meant him to. As nice as it would be to have someone beside her, that was how it had started with Johnny. She couldn't do that to Kent. With him responding to her kindness the way he had in the months since, she was glad for her restraint, especially after his outburst the night he agreed to the mission. His accusations against her were not without merit. The longer she went without Johnny, the harder it was for her to spend time with Kent. More nights than not, she found herself praying for the thoughts that she had about him to disappear. In truth, they hadn't. If anything, they were worsening, but Kent's hatred for her after everything that had happened made it easier to distract herself. It was hard to express her love for something that wasn't there. Realizing how much her mind was pushing Johnny away after Andrew had asked her the question of replacing him, she had taken to writing down little things, details and memories that put her back several months to being with him, and why she was so adamant to have him back. A small notebook on her bedside table was filled with scribbles. The freckles on his shoulders, the smell of his deodorant, the way he stares off into space when he starts thinking about something. There were those things she couldn't put to words either. Something about the way he held her, the way he talked to her, the way he kissed her. He'd been her second kiss, the first apparently meaningless to the boy who had taken it the year prior, but she could tell Johnny meant every one, like it was the most important thing he would ever do every time he did it. The way he had in Beijing. She guessed it was the way he put her first in everything they did. It was a selfish thought, she knew, but that thought was what drove her more than anything to have him back. In the worst case that Johnny was gone forever, that was something she could never expect from Kent. Another 2 pages had been filled by the time her eyes were too heavy to stay open. His eyes had been the last thought on her mind, the golden ring just outside his pupils that made the green around them pop so dramatically. She set the notebook on the pillow he used to use and prayed herself to sleep, dreaming of seeing them again. The next morning, the four were escorted by Xander to the city hospital for medical checks. Margot looked slightly worried on the way, but both Jordan and Xander assured her she was fine. According to Jordan, it had been over a week since her last vomiting session, and despite the occasional feeling of fatigue, she was nearly back to normal. Like the last time, Emma found herself stripped in front of a male doctor, being asked progressively more invasive questions about her dietary and sleeping habits. He took her temperature repeatedly, checked each of her joints, and, to her confusion, measured the circumference of her arm at wrist, elbow, and shoulder, a new practice since January. His holding of her hands and comments about her lack of iron reminded her painfully of Johnny. But distracted by the follow-up test of her reflexes, Emma returned to the lobby reinvigorated to set off and find him. Jordan was there, already finished. "Easy enough?" she asked rhetorically. "Failed my eyesight test," he joked. "Could have sworn it was fine last time." Emma laughed, wishing there were more moments she could spend with Jordan aside from Margot. Xander emerged 5 minutes later with a grumpy frown. "You look happy," Jordan smiled. Xander shot him a look. "I'm getting old," he noted, refusing to elaborate. "You're like 30, Jordan laughed. Xander expanded his frown. 28, thanks. Xander, if I look as good as you do at 28, I'll be satisfied, Jordan offered. Emma shrugged, gesturing to his eye. You don't look that good now. His two-word response was something he clearly learned from Margot, but all three of them cracked a smile. It was nice to feel the pair of them at least partially on her team again. Jordan cracked several jokes back at her expense, and several times the trio broke out in fits of laughter that caused the nurse at the desk to peek up from behind her computer. 10 minutes later, Kent emerged to pacify their fun. Took you a bit, Jordan prodded, trying to elicit a similar response. Kent shrugged. Testing my leg. He sat down next to Xander, as far from Emma's chair as he could reasonably be. How is it? Jordan asked with genuine concern. Fine, Kent shrugged again. They still don't want me running with it, but it's finally starting to heal the way it did before. How much longer was this than the first time? She asked. Kent didn't even acknowledge her question. He picked up a magazine from the nearest end table and pretended to read it. The other two gave her cautious looks, before all three understood their entertainment was over, and in turn pulled out their phones. An additional 20 minutes passed before Jordan acknowledged why they were still waiting. Hey, where's Margot? They all peeked up, turning to the door as though she might suddenly appear, but it remained closed, a dull white like the walls surrounding them. Probably just doing additional tests, Xander reasoned. Jordan perked up, worried. You think they found something? Xander shook his head. I'm sure they're just testing her for the virus. Emma failed to stop her thoughts from spewing out of her mouth. I swear, if we miss the mission... Trust me, Jordan agreed. I'd be pissed too. Kent and Xander both glared at them. Give her grace, Xander diminished. She's doing the best she can. I'm going with or without her, Jordan continued. She can stay in bed. I'm getting Johnny back. Emma agreed with him, but Jordan's fierceness was surprising. We can't just go without her, Kent spoke up. Why not? Jordan raised. Andrew did fine during training. He could just take her place. It's really not that simple, Xander defended. Training was one thing. To fully replace a member of a squad for a mission, that's practically unheard of. They were scheduled to fly out that evening. I'm not going to let another squad take our mission because my girlfriend has a stomach ache. Jordan, Emma huffed, finally having enough. Unfortunate as it was, Xander was right. There was nothing Margot could do about being sick. Relax, she calmed. Margot's fine. Ask the nurse if you're so concerned, Xander suggested. Jordan looked ready to argue but resigned himself to agree. The nurse's desk was far enough from their seats that Emma could only pick up pieces of their brief conversation. But the line, "I can't give you that information," carried across the lobby. Jordan sat back down with a grunt, looking anxiously at the clock. Emma returned to her phone, only to feel the weight of time ticking on as they continued to sit and wait without a sign of Margot. "Is she even here?" Jordan spoke, another several minutes later. They had been in the hospital for 2.5 hours. "I'm sure she's fine," Emma found herself repeating, though even Xander was beginning to look worried. "You guys can go grab lunch if you need to," he offered. "I'll stay." "No," Jordan frowned. "If she's still here, then we—" The door next to the nurse's desk opened, revealing another female in blue with a clipboard in her hands. Jordan half stood, but upon realizing Margot wasn't with her, sat back down. His face was white. The nurse stepped forward. "Mr. Xander?" she said. "Miss Guerin?" Emma was surprised to hear her name. "Would you both come with me, please?" She turned to Jordan, who returned the same confused grimace. Xander had already stood to go. "Me?" Emma asked, concerned. "You're Emma, correct?" the nurse raised. She nodded. "Then yes," the nurse confirmed. "The two of you please come with me." Emma stood. So did Jordan. "Just the two of you," the nurse added, stopping Jordan in his tracks. Emma turned, noting the fear in his eye. "It's fine," she assured. "She's fine, don't worry about it." But a feeling of dread cascaded over her as soon as the door to the lobby closed behind them. Why do they need me? She wondered anxiously. If something's wrong, why wouldn't they just grab Xander? The only answer she found plausible was that Margot had asked for her specifically. But Margot would want Jordan, wouldn't she? If something was wrong... A thicker curtain of dread enveloped Emma as they walked the entire length of the exam hall and left through a back door. "Where are we going?" Xander asked first. "Is Margot all right?" The nurse remained ambivalent. "She'll be waiting for you," she stated. "Dr. Montgomery will explain everything." Xander took a hard breath as they walked up a back staircase to a new floor. Oh God, she thought. Something did happen to her. The question returned to her mind. Why would they grab me instead of Jordan? With a horrified gasp, she recognized herself as Margot's closest family. Expecting then to find her dead on a slab, Emma was partially relieved to find the party walking through a hallway of offices. Nearly 2/3 down the length of the hall, they stopped outside an unmarked door. Their escort knocked, and a smooth voice on the other side called them in. Behind a large wooden desk sat a graying doctor in a white coat, his hands folded patiently atop the surface. Seated in the middle of 3 chairs ahead of him was Margot, her hand clutching that of another uniformed nurse sat beside her. A blue blanket was wrapped over her shoulders. Even several meters away, Emma could see she was shaking profusely, her head rocking back and forth as though she were hyperventilating. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face small and afraid as she registered their entry. 2 of her fingernails were bleeding from where she had nervously picked at them. As soon as the door closed, she shot from her chair and lunged at Emma. Emma raised her hands in defense, only to find Margot collapse on her shoulder, bursting into tears and soaking clean through her shirt. Stunned, Emma unclenched her fist and wrapped them around Margot's back. Covered by the congestion of her tears and staggered breathing, she could make out the attempts at her name, and the repeating of the word sorry. Hey, she tried several times, still bitterly confused. It's all right. It's going to be all right. Xander and the other nurse had to peel Margot off her before Emma collapsed from the weight, but even as they made their way back to the doctor's desk, Margot kept her hand clutched tight in Emma's. Uncomfortable and frightened, Emma knew she had little choice. She helped the nurse return the blanket to Margot's shoulders. Sorry to have kept you waiting for so long, the doctor began, turning specifically to Xander. Given the nature of our test this morning, Mr. Ear is broadly aware of the situation preventing her from your upcoming mission, but asks that you both be here with her for the more serious news. A breath caught in her throat. Emma turned to Margot, but her eyes remained forward, facing the doctor at a distance of 1,000 yards. The doctor continued. When we started her examination this morning, we were made aware of her conditions the previous weeks, and the symptoms most of your squad were exhibiting as part of the recent rise in seasonal flu. In addition to the basic tests, we also swabbed Mr. Ear for evidence of extended influenza. He looked at Emma. Everything came back negative. However, during the examination, Mr. Ear was showing obvious signs of abdominal discomfort. Without doing more invasive testing, there wasn't anything we could confirm until her blood test returned, during which we recognized elevation in her HCG levels. Jesus, Xander swore. Emma turned, confused by what this meant. It's not uncommon for students to try to hide it given the punishment for things where they're confirmed, the doctor explained, still turned to Xander. Though typically they're smart enough not to wait until the pre-mission to reveal it. In Mr. Yer's case, it's my understanding that she had no idea, and there's a rather unique reason why. Emma felt her hand drop from Margot's as a pair of black and white images were shifted on the desk toward them. We call it an ectopic pregnancy. In rare cases, eggs are fertilized inside the fallopian tubes and begin growing there rather than inside the uterus. In addition to the obvious risk factors concerning both the mother's and the child's health, the symptoms of the pregnancy can also present themselves in irregular ways. The obvious apparently was not interrupted up to this point, giving Mr. Ear little reason to suspect any change. Emma turned to Margot, her ears ringing with the news. Xander's face was a livid pink, his jaw clenched hard enough to shatter his teeth. Even in these cases, there is the slim chance of healthy growth and recovery, the doctor continued grimly. However, when we examined the location in question, we discovered that the child, despite having grown successfully outside the womb for several weeks, was no longer showing signs of life. A guttural cry burst from Margot as she collapsed into her arms over the back edge of the desk. Emma had stopped breathing. Her eyes burning with tears, she was consumed by a mix of sadness and bitter anger which froze her to the spot. Even with Margot's wailing, the room was deathly silent. After several minutes, Margot was unable to make any more noise, leaving them with nothing but the hum of the overhead lights. With a nervous cough, Xander broke the silence. "How far along?" he managed, his own voice broken. Dr. Montgomery unfolded his hands and sighed. "Right now we believe about 9 weeks. 9 weeks, Emma thought. In answering her unspoken question, the doctor added, "The child would have had a heartbeat." Margot burst into tears again. Xander threw his head back, no doubt thinking about his own wife, his eyes so vain they were nearly yellow. Emma felt her breath catch again. Xander cleared his throat harshly. "What does that mean for her?" he asked. Physically." The doctor refolded his hands. "I'm glad you asked," he said gently. "Because of the location and progression of growth, it's unlikely Mr. Ear's body will be able to, for lack of a more humane phrase, pass the child on her own. Which means if we don't undergo a surgical removal in the next 24 hours, there may be even more serious complications, which could put her life at risk. Now, the surgery has its own risk of complications, but why is this even a question?" Xander laughed hysterically. Just do it." "It's not exactly that simple," the doctor calmed. "Because of the injury to service law, this triggers an investigation." "Well, to hell with your investigation," Xander returned. We all know who the father is. You can take him right from the lobby if that's what you're after." "Xander," Emma scolded. He turned incensed. "What?" he shrieked. "Am I missing something?" "Mr. Eyre," Dr. Montgomery interjected, firm but comforting. "Your consent is needed to undergo the surgery, so long as you're conscious and able." Xander turned, the same mix of anger and sadness now matching on his face. Emma swallowed hard, watching Margot stare into the distance, terrified. After a stilling pause, she slowly nodded. "All right, then." The doctor turned to the nurses in the room. "Send a prep down to the OR. I'll be down there in 10. The nurses moved swiftly out the door. Dr. Montgomery turned to Xander. "The 3 of you are welcome to stay here," he instructed. "Mr. Eyre, we should do it as soon as possible. You can't be prosecuted for admitting this here, so I need to know honestly. Have you consumed any drugs or alcohol in the last week?" Still with a dead gaze in her eyes, Margot shook her head. "Anything prescribed or over the counter?" To the surprise of both Em and Xander, she continued to shake her head no. "Good," the doctor acknowledged. "Makes preparation a lot easier. One of the nurses will be up to grab you in 15. I know this isn't easy, so if you'd like anyone with you for comfort, let them know to be in the OR in half an hour. We can permit 2 guests, and given the nature of the surgery, an additional exception can be made for a person of faith." He turned his eyes to Emma. "Any questions?" A silence resonated through the room. "Good," he concluded. 15 minutes. Dr. Montgomery rushed from his desk, grabbing a second coat from a hanger near the door, leaving the 3 of them alone in the room, utterly stunned. As soon as the door shut, Margot turned to Emma. Emma, she stuttered, doing her best to speak between sobbing and shaking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Emma looked over at Xander, whose eyes were still depressingly plastered to the ultrasounds. She could hardly breathe. Her legs numb, she managed to stand. Margot followed her to her feet. "Please," Margot begged, clutching her desperately at her hands. I can't. I can't do it. I need you. I'm so sorry. She found Margot's eyes. They had never looked more terrified. Your dad, she continued. The mission, The mission. The mission was the last thing on Emma's mind. Even Johnny seemed insignificant compared to this. Words failed her completely as thoughts threatened to do the same. Emma was frozen, struggling to comprehend everything they'd just been told. She wanted to scream. She wanted to slap Margot in the face the same as she had done to her. As clarity returned, the urge to berate Margot for every little mistake she had ever made came flooding from her brain to her mouth. This is why, she thought, concluding answers to a dozen questions with which Margot had bullied her in the past. I told you, I warned you again and again, and you never listened. Xander was still staring at the pictures, and just as Emma turned back to let herself loose, her eyes fell back from Margot's, and she took in her full face. Every thought disappeared from her mind as she saw her sister standing in front of her, pleading for help. Emma threw her hands around Margot, and her sister fell against her shoulder. I need you, she sobbed. I need you there. I know, Emma whispered. I'll be there. Your dad, Margot repeated. Your parents, how am I? Emma shook her head, holding her sister tighter. Let me worry about them, she comforted. Do you want my mom with us? Margot broke into another fit of sobs, profusely nodding her head into Emma's arm. Emma, I'm so sorry, she continued. Why are you sorry? Emma scolded gently. Margot pulled herself back, her eyes a dripping black. The mission, she repeated. Margot, I don't care about the mission, she said. You... Whatever she was going to say, it lost its importance with another glance at Margot. She pulled her into another hug and buried her face in Margot's hair. I love you, she whispered, and Margot fell apart completely. They stood together for 10 minutes, only breaking when a nurse returned to escort Margot downstairs. I'll be right there with you, she assured. Mom, too. Xander didn't even turn to say goodbye. As soon as Margot was out the door, Emma took several deep breaths, wiped her eyes, and called her mom. It was only halfway through the school day, so her mother would need an emergency substitute. Emma stressed the situation as much as she could without going into detail. This was not a conversation had over the phone. By the time she had finished, Xander was on his feet, looking as grim as ever and as though he hadn't taken a breath in several minutes. He finally exhaled, his breath coming out shaky and close to tears. Need me to talk to them? He said softly. His eyes were still transfixed on the pictures. Emma understood this wasn't something they were going to talk about. I'll handle my parents, she assured. I don't have it in me for Jordan. Xander nodded, turning to the door where a second nurse led them soundlessly back to their original waiting room. When the door there opened, Kent had his arm on Jordan's back, himself bent over, his hands folded over his knees. He looked up and saw them standing there, rising to his feet. His white face was gray with a depressed certainty. He knew what was happening before either opened their mouth. A deep sigh preceded his question. How long do I have?